non-denominational Christian faith, age 3 until about 2021. My first exposure to Islam began in middle school. That's when I created my first Muslim friends. But, I mean, it was a public school. We were very young. We didn't discuss faith. So I didn't really have a deep understanding of Islam at that age. And then fast forward to high school, the only exposure that I got was from my global history textbook, because I went to a predominantly Jewish, white, Asian public high school in New York City. So then fast forward to college, my first friends were actually Muslim. So I thought that was really interesting because the church that I attended was very influenced by the Jewish faith. I mean, sometimes they would have flags of Israel, like hanging. So I always had some kind of bias. Like, I was very biased toward Jews. I favored them. I actually didn't like Muslims. So to be sitting here is actually kind of a big thing. So my first friends in college were Egyptian and Indian. And I think we can all agree that Arabs are very strong-minded. And when they became closer to me, I remember my Egyptian friend used to show me videos on YouTubers bashing the Christian faith and showing videos on how the Trinity is a farce, how it's not true. And that kind of started to raise questions of my own faith. So I started attending, I was a churchgoer. I would go 3 times a week. And I started to wonder why the church would say, God is Jesus, Jesus is God, and why those phrases were so used interchangeably. It got to the point where I one day asked a pastor, can you please tell me what you mean by the Trinity? Because I honestly don't understand it. And I know that there's another convert in the room, but I'm sure you can agree that the Trinity is something that the Christian church can't explain to you. So after watching these videos that I thought were very rude of my friends, but that I eventually grew to appreciate, I started having doubts. As I said, I started attending church a lot less, and I just started to do my own research on Islam. And all I wanted were answers on the Trinity, because for me, I was hanging by a very thin thread. I wanted to have answers because in the back of my mind, I did not want to convert. Literally all of my college friends were Muslim, and I thought these are signs that God's showing me, but I'm kind of trying to avoid or trying to not fall into. I didn't want to succumb to this idea of being a Latina Muslim, because it just wasn't something that ever crossed my mind. I mean, when you grow up in a Latino household, you're expected to follow that faith, the faith that your mom follows. So I was always afraid of doing research. I was always afraid of admitting that I don't have an argument for why the Trinity is something that I believe in. Because when my friend would show me videos of YouTubers discussing the Trinity and why it doesn't really make sense, I always felt offended because I never had a logical argument. I never understood it myself, so that's why I felt offended. I felt offended because I was ignorant in my own Christian faith. And that all had to do with how the church I attended sort of wanted you to follow the faith blindly. I remember, I think I said this, I don't know if I did, but I went up to a pastor and I asked him, can you explain the Trinity? And he pretty much said, you shouldn't question it, you should just believe it. So that for me was the biggest red flag. And after that, a lot of what was being taught at the church just felt like a huge red flag. So I started doing my own research, and I went into a rabbit hole called, my journey into Islam. And I realized that I had this affinity for Islam. As I progressed in my college, I realized that all my friends were Muslim, as I said. And I started becoming envious of women in the hijab. I thought, wow, that's so beautiful. Like, they're wearing the hijab, they're wearing their faith. Like, if I were to walk into a room right now without a scarf on, no one would understand. No one would know what I follow or what I believe in. So for me, like, even though right now as a Muslim it's challenging to wear the scarf, I think it's an honor to wear the scarf. So that's something that you don't really get in Christianity. There's no dress code. There's no real structure to the lifestyle that you should be leading. So I was also very acquainted with the Muslim Student Association at my college. And I always felt envious because I would walk by their club room in my college and I would see them praying. I would walk my friends to the club room and I would think to myself, wow, that's amazing. Like they're practicing their faith. If you walk by the Christian club room, they're not doing that. They're intermingling. They're not really upholding the Christian values that they should be. So that was, there were a lot of things that I started thinking about that to me were sort of leading me into Islam. In high school, the only exposure that I had to Islam was one paragraph in my textbook on the Ottoman Empire, which discussed Sunni and Shia in literally like 2 sentences. So as I started reading up on Islam, I asked my friends, can you tell me the differences between Sunniism and Shiaism? And they would literally tell me, Shias are not Muslim. Shias are, they have their own Quran. They don't believe in the Prophet Muhammad as being the final messenger. Like, I literally heard every single argument that you can think of. And to me, that actually drew me, it attracted me to researching on Islam because I figured, well, it seems like they're the underdog, right? So why not look into that faith and see if I can understand it myself? Because no one was really giving me proper or appropriate responses or feedback. So yeah, I did my own research and I saw they have the same Quran. They pray 5 times a day, same as Sunnism, but all it is that they follow the imamate and they have a lot of respect for the Prophet's family. And to me, that was very beautiful. Like, how can you deny the teachings from Allah to Prophet Muhammad down to his lineage? So to me, that was one of the reasons why I saw that Shiaism was for me. And before I converted, I read this book on a pastor who used to follow, he was a pastor, so he was obviously Christian, and he decided to question his faith because he realized that he was also following it blindly. And there's one verse in the Bible that he argues foreshadows the events of Karbala, and it's basically, it states that God's going to sacrifice someone by the river of Euphrates. So when I read that, I thought, wow, this is like a huge sign from God. And I decided to convert, and here I am. I really like Islam because it provides structure. You're thinking about God constantly 5 times a day or more, right? I remember when I was Christian, I would literally not pray. Like, I literally only went to church 3 times a week or once a week and only prayed there. There was no real guidance to how to pray to God, how to think of God. I mean, in Islam, they tell you if you do wudu before sleeping, you'll be protected. So I thought that was incredible. There's a lot of guidance to the lifestyle that one should be living. So yeah, that's.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So as was said earlier, my name is Austin. I've been Muslim for 6.5, going on 7 years. I became Muslim back in 2012 when I first went to college. So quick background, I'm from a military family. My dad is still in the Army until the end of this month. So he's been in for about 30 years. He's been all over the Middle East, all over Europe, and also a lot of Asia. So my first exposure to Islam was kind of through him, and which was pretty negative. So needless to say, my mom is a very, very devout evangelical Christian. My parents are, my whole family is kind of the Trump-supporting evangelical, background. So it makes life really interesting. Tatiana, my initial, exposure to Islam was kind of through high school. I went to a Christian high school, and I got, very negative view of Islam. Like she said, kind of like 2 sentences in a book. Very negative. Even the curriculum that was taught for history was like from a Christian perspective. So it was extremely biased towards anything that involved, something that wasn't supporting, Israel or the, kind of crusade, Inquisition type background of how to deal with Muslims and with Islam. So as I went through high school, I had a kind of a life-changing event. I had to have a surgery on my back that when I was 14, and I was in bed for about 2 months, and it took me about a year to fully recover. I got addicted to like opiates. I was on a lot of morphine, a lot of like oxycodone and things like that. So even now, whenever I have like any type of dental work, I have to avoid getting that and just kind of deal with the pain because it's easy for me to kind of get back into that. So that kind of put me on a bad track, and I got involved in a lot of like, you can't really say like anti-religion, but not because I wasn't fully atheist, but it was most like agnostic and very anti-Christian, anti-established religion. And then, so I kind of questioned Christianity a lot. I still went to church. I still, followed kind of what my parents wanted me to do. I got thrown out a lot of Bible classes in high school for questioning things that I shouldn't. And like Sister Tatiana, I questioned the concept of the Trinity a lot, didn't get a lot of the answers I wanted, so I didn't get along with a lot of my instructors. After that, I went to college, decided I was going to try to be more open-minded, and was extremely closed-minded towards Islam in particular. Like I was willing to look at pretty much everybody except for them. And then my roommate ended up being Muslim. So it was kind of a interesting little event. He was an interesting person. So, but he kind of introduced me to like the Muslim community, and I was kind of like, okay, these people aren't crazy, not all of them at least. And so, so that kind of was my first introduction. I kind of used to hang out with a few Muslims here and there, had a few in my classes, and then I started challenging them, as to what their beliefs were, and just kind of giving them a hard time, kind of writing them about the typical things. Why do you pray 5 times a day? Why do you have to go and, walk around the big box in Saudi Arabia? Why do women have to cover themselves and, you treat them so badly? All these kind of things. So that kind of really, got me involved with them. And then I started to notice that I was kind of attracted to their answers. A lot of, they, after, showing me that I was a fool for a lot of my opinions that I had and answering me in really, with solid proofs and evidences that even I agreed with personally, it kind of led me towards accepting a lot of the worldviews that Muslims had. So that kind of led me into, spending a lot of time with them, learning about the religion, researching on my own. And a lot of people ask, like, what was the one thing that made you convert? And, I don't know if you have the same experience, but mine was mostly that there's no one thing. It was just a sum of a lot of things that kind of one day you're just sitting there and you're like, I agree with everything that, these people believe, why don't I do it as well? And that was kind of how it worked. So my first exposure to Muslims, though, was to mostly students from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, and Egypt. So after I became Muslim, I was heavily influenced by the Wahhabi background. That was kind of like where I kind of came into everything with. And so, within probably not too long, probably about like 2 years, it was kind of like, I was pretty extreme in my views. Kind of thought I knew everything, and it wasn't very good. I used to drive my wife insane with a lot of the things that I would say, and I gave her and her family even a hard time that I shouldn't have. But when you're brought into something and that's your initial influence, you kind of follow it. So within about 4 years of becoming Muslim, it was kind of like you have like ISIS, Al Qaeda, and then like kind of like me. It's like not too far from there. So and slowly it's kind of like they call it Salafi burnout. Where you kind of hit a point where you're tired of fighting everybody and arguing with everybody, and I kind of hit that and almost left the religion. And so I have like some statistics and stuff here, but it's like within the first 5 to 7 years, 80% of people who become Muslim actually leave the religion. So it's kind of like a really, really high statistic that, so if you got 10 people that convert on a given day, in 1 year, 7 years later, 8 of them are gone, typically. So, I kind of went through that phase, and it was like a real identity crisis, and, I kind of just got more involved in like traditional Sunni, Sufi type, Islam, and started looking into more of the Shia background as well, which is why I'm here now. So I guess, we'll move on, past the introductions into kind of some of the topics. So you wanted to go first? You sure? Okay. So when I became Muslim, an imam that I spoke to the next day told me that I would face 3 major problems after I became Muslim. And he'd been Muslim for about 25 years, and he was a convert from Catholicism. So he said the first would be with my family, my friends, and acquaintances, people I work with, because that'd be like the first initial impact. How do you deal with them? The second would be with the Muslim community itself. And finally, kind of as you dealt with all of these, eventually you'd come to a point where you have to reconcile everything with yourself. And so, so everyone always talks about Islam is always growing. Islam is the fastest growing religion. And statistically, this is true. There's more Muslims per capita that are, every year, increasing. But why is this? Is it really because, the Muslim community is so effective at attracting people to Islam? Attracting, yes, but retaining, no. So as I said earlier, within 5 to 7 years, 70 to 80% of people who become Muslim are no longer Muslim for multiple reasons. And I think part of the reason why is the first one, and I went through a document that an imam put together who had been Muslim for about 50 years. And he gave 5 major reasons why. And the first is sectarianism. That's like number one. The first thing that drives people away is sectarianism. And it's because like you become Muslim and you walk in, and it's kind of like you're walking into a buffet. You got your Salafis over here, your Sufis over here, your Shias over here. And then inside of each of those, there's like 10 or 15 different groups, so it makes it very difficult. And then with the sectarianism, you have the cultures that are all clashing at the same time, and so it's like, okay, I became Muslim right at the beginning of like the Arab Spring, or I guess like right in the middle of it. So I've got all these friends that are like fighting with each other, about like, who's right in Syria, who's right in Yemen, who's right in Egypt. And so you're trying to figure out this religion, and while you're trying to figure out, okay, what's right and what's wrong, you've got 15 different groups and people trying to tell you that, trying to decide that for you. And that gets incredibly difficult. The second one is just unfortunately, is ill treatment from other Muslims. And there's this one quote from a guy that I knew back in California, and he said, "Sometimes I feel more welcome walking into Walmart than I do walking into the masjid." and I kind of thought about it, and it's true, because sometimes you walk into a new masjid, and everyone just kind of turns and looks at you, and they're like, okay, is this guy like an FBI agent, or what's going on here? And so, and everyone kind of ignores you for the first 10, 15 minutes, where at least at Walmart, someone shakes her, says, "Hi, welcome to Walmart," and so, and again, like I said, you have, these different cultures that are fighting each other inside of the masjid, and then you also have them involving politics from back home, in other countries they came from. And you're kind of sitting here just like, okay, I know nothing about, the politics of, Iraq or Iran or Lebanon, but they're all fighting about it. And if I want to be able to sit and talk with these people, I guess I got to get involved too. And so then you sit there and you're listening, and no one really talks to you still because they're all speaking in Arabic or Farsi. And so you just kind of end up sitting there, kind of giggling whenever everyone starts laughing. So the third major reason was community arguments over like petty issues. So, the typical, we have our masjid here. Those guys a mile down the road, we don't like them because of this and this and that. That really, when you walk into that, you're trying to leave that. I came from a Protestant background where there's like 6,000 different denominations, right? And it's like, the evangelicals don't like the Pentecostals, and they don't like the Methodists, and they don't like the, Lutherans. And so you become Muslim, and you're like, okay, it's not going to be like that, and then it is. So you're like, okay, so why did I come here anyway? And the fourth one is lack of congregation. So it's kind of cool that we're all here tonight. It's awesome. Everyone's like, hanging out, talking. But then everyone leaves, and everyone kind of ignores each other for the most part from what I've seen in the past. Maybe not necessarily this community, but most communities, it's like kind of like Christians where on Sunday everyone's at church and singing Kumbaya and it's all good. And then as soon as you leave, it's not. And no one's really there for you. No one really has your back. And it's kind of a joke with converts, where it's like, you become, while you're learning about Islam, everyone's always giving you rides to the masjid, giving you free food, taking you out to eat, inviting you to their house. You become Muslim, and it's like, all right, see you next Friday, That's kind of it, And so then you're and they'll hand you maybe a couple books, that you don't have any idea about. And they're like, here, read this, and this will kind of explain everything to you. And that's how I ended up. Where you read books and you think you know more than scholars who've been doing this for 30, 40 years. And so, but the number one kind of overarching thing that most converts deal with, and that I dealt with for a long time, and I was really lucky because I ended up getting married like 8 months after I became Muslim, and my wife and I are still trying to figure out how that happened. But essentially, that I credit that with being the main reason why I'm still Muslim, honestly, is because like I was going all over the place, and every time I'd go like way over here, she'd try and pull me back, and it was a mess. And so, but you really get this feeling of isolation, where even though when you're sitting in a room with your own family members that are Muslim, you still feel alone because, you don't speak the language, you don't have that, you didn't grow up, hearing these stories or hearing these, these concepts. And so you're kind of like, okay, I have no idea what these people are talking about. I really don't relate to them at all, even though they're your family, you're married, to their daughter, and you're sitting there, but at the same time, you're trying to figure out like, okay, where do I fit in, right? And so this lack of acceptance and isolation, if you were to poll, Muslims, and this imam did, he polled like, I think it was like 2,000 converts. He interviewed and, asked through these questionnaires, their number one overarching, feeling was this isolation and lack of acceptance. And so, I'm not trying to, point fingers and say, hey, it's your fault that we're having a hard time, but it does help when you give us a little bit more time. So, we're always either too extreme or too liberal. A girl becomes Muslim, she doesn't wear hijab. Sister, why aren't you wearing hijab? You need to wear hijab. So she puts on hijab and an abaya. Why are you wearing an abaya? You should wear regular clothes with just the hijab. So it's like you can never please anybody, right? A guy becomes Muslim, brother, you should come to the masjid more. You should attend the majalis, this and that. So you start showing up all the time. You start becoming more religious. Brother, you're taking it too far. So it's kind of like, you're always trying to like, please this group and please that group. And so the last thing I'm going to say real quick before I hand it over is, when you come across somebody who, who converted, you got to try to understand their mindset. And it took me a while to understand my own mindset. I still have a hard time sometimes, kind of coming to grips with, how I feel about certain things. And the first one is that you're dealing with somebody who has basically had to rip their entire self out, look at it on the table and say, okay, what do I keep and what do I leave? Right? Like what, and when you finally say, okay, I think I should be leaving this stuff. Now, what do I replace it with? You look at a religion and everyone's fighting and arguing, trying to tell you what to replace it with, and it's all contradicting, right? So you kind of feel like half empty a lot of the time, okay? And then once you've been pulled in all these directions and you're trying to figure this out, you go to people for help, and they're very reluctant to actually help you. In the end, like they'll say they want to help, but at the end of the day, not really. At the beginning when I first became Muslim, I got more help from my Christian friends than I did anybody at the masjid, and for probably the first few months. And then the last thing is, it's kind of like, so while all that's going on, for example, I think about my own parents. My grandmother passed away almost 2 years ago now. And, I think about it, and you got to remember that, when you mention certain things, I don't know what's going to happen in my family when they die. Probably each of you in here, your parents are Muslim or your brothers, sisters, whatever, you have a pretty good idea of how things are going to go for them. We don't have that luxury. When we look at our parents, we're looking at them, hoping that one day they become Muslim because, if they don't, when they die, we kind of, it's very unclear, necessarily how God is going to handle them, depending on how extreme they were in certain views that they had. And so that's another thing that you just kind of add on to it. So in a day when you walk up to somebody who became Muslim, all these things could have been going through their mind 10 minutes before. And then you're going to tell them, like, why are you praying like that? Put your hands this way. Why are you dressed that way? So it's just kind of like one more thing on top of it all the time. So just, that's pretty much all I have, so just, the communities, here so far, I've always been treated well. I've never had any issues or anything, but I have been to places before where I was pretty much run off, or finally just felt so unwelcome that I didn't come back, and so I think that, including, people who are converts into the community and including them in, different organizations that the community has is critical because it's an area that a lot of people leave because they don't feel included. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that you said. As a convert, you constantly feel a chip on your shoulder, like you have to prove yourself. I remember when I got married, I was asked, did you convert for him? I said, no, I converted before I got married. So there's just this constant, you're fighting yourself, you're fighting your family, you're fighting everything to prove yourself. And it comes to the point where you feel so isolated because you don't know who you are sometimes. You go from being a Christian to, converting, to feeling isolated because communities aren't there for you. So there's just so much that goes on in our minds. Even to this day, I think about everything that you just said. It's really difficult. As he said, the people that leave Islam, it's at a very high rate. And honestly, as he said, had it not been for my husband and his family, I would have probably left Islam because there's just, where I'm from, there's really no community. There are no resources for converts. So I appreciate that at least this masjid, you guys are giving us this pedestal tonight to discuss the issues that we have been through. It's definitely very difficult with family. I went through a period where my parents were okay with me converting, but then when ISIS started coming on CNN every single night, my dad called me into his bedroom and he's like, he called me into his bedroom, but I could hear everything in the background on CNN, and he pretty much told me that I would be an embarrassment, I'd be the biggest shame of the family. So you go through all of these emotional hurdles, and then once you convert, there are so many more hurdles you have to go through because you feel so isolated. You sort of forget who you are, and you sort of have to accept that you have a past, but now you have to create a future with your new faith. So it's very difficult. Should I discuss school or? Okay, so when I converted 3 weeks prior to graduating from the school I went to in New York. And I remember within a week, I lost literally all my friends unless they were Muslim. And I was only close to about 2 or 3 girls at this point. And I think it just shows you that God paves the way for you to choose those that uplift you and to to cut ties with those that will not benefit you. When you convert, I was told when you convert, you're pretty much a blank slate. So when I think of a blank slate, I think of a baby. A baby has, their brain is developing, they're a sponge. So that's sort of how I see converts. I'm not saying I'm a baby, but I'm saying that treat us in a way where we can learn. Don't just throw a lot of information at us because it can get very overwhelming. Because everyone here, everyone's very lucky. They're born into a faith and they're able to learn from their parents, the 2 of us. we literally do research for a few years, and then we convert. So I went through a phase where I thought, wow, I have to make up 20 years of prayers or 20 years of knowledge that I completely missed. But yeah, so in terms of school, you go through all these different phases with friends and losing friends, but God shows you the way. Did you want to add anything to that? Okay. Yeah. In terms of work, I haven't really worked as a Muslim, but I just finished nursing school, so whenever I had 12-hour shifts at the hospital, I would literally have one or two patients ask me, where are you from? Why do you wear the scarf? Can you tell me about your faith? And even though this works as a form of preaching Islam, it's very overwhelming because you sometimes just want to do what you have to do. You want to treat the patient, but then when you're constantly asked something about your faith, or you're belittled, I mean, I don't know about you, well, no, but you're a guy. So. But when you wear the scarf, okay, so obviously before I converted, I didn't wear a scarf. So I never had to experience that feeling of harassment. But once you convert, you feel the harassment constantly, either through someone asking you inappropriate questions, questioning why you wear the scarf and why men don't have to cover up. And you also feel like it's just something that we're not all that prepared for. So it's, as a convert, it's definitely challenging, but we learn along the way. So, any questions? Yeah.
Any questions, comments?
So any questions? We'll start with the ladies' side.
Yes, the convert of 40-some years, yes. Alhamdulillah, you guys have the internet now. We had no Islamic books. I mean, when we found the book, it was like the best Snicker bar we could find, we gobbled it up. But you're right. I've been Muslim for over 43 years, and my parents still think I'm going to hell. So the problem is, you're right. It's a real hard struggle. It's worth it. I think the other thing what we can ask the Muslims is that it's easy to preach about a religion, and we look to them, but I'm now thankful as a convert that I was not born a Muslim, because I got to throw away all my garbage. I got to throw away my culture, and I had to start over. And I think that actually makes it easier, because we see many Muslims that cannot give up their culture, and they put it before Islam. And then they tell us this is Islam. And it gets very confusing after a while, because you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem quite right. And if you're in part of a family that does that, it makes it very hard, because now you're standing up against your own flesh and blood, but now you're standing up against your spouse's flesh and blood. So that's another problem you have to deal with. But alhamdulillah, going to work, I've been there. I know how it feels. But the best thing we can do is not preach about Islam, live it. Don't steal from your employer. Don't sell alcohol as a Muslim. Don't preach to other people, you can't be a Muslim because your name is Debbie. You know how many Muslim doctors came up to me and said, you can't be a Muslim? While she's wearing an A-line skirt with a dipped neckline. She's telling me I can't be a Muslim. And I'm like, I don't understand this. How come Arabs don't have to change their names? They're not Islamic names, but they don't have to change them. But we have to change. That I don't understand. And I think that we have to question why we have to do what we do, and also be very careful. Like, we had some converts come in a couple weeks ago, and it's scary because they're on this slippery path, and you don't know if they're going to be able to stay on the pond before they slip off. And when they look at us as Muslims, for examples, now I tell every convert, please don't look at me. I do it wrong. I'm just learning. I'm still learning. Please just go learn. Learn from the books. Learn from your marja. Get a marja. Ask the questions from a marja. Don't ask from all of us. We make mistakes. So now we multiply those mistakes by sharing them with other people. So that's my take on it.
Were there any other questions of the ladies?
She actually touched upon it a little bit.
like every revert/convert I talk to, there's like a hidden story about how people were throwing names at them, that this is a name you should adopt, whereas a name is such an essential part of who you are. But and I'm sure you guys, it seems like you went through that. My second question was for Brother Austin. Like white men like you are at the top of the privilege like totem pole, and Islam typically attracts the less privileged. Since the beginning, it was, you know, the oppressed. So how did
So being like blonde or blue-eyed white Muslim is really interesting because I think the mass majority of converts are either, you know, African American or from Hispanic backgrounds, and so, you know, a lot of the times people, you know, they look at me and I mean, I've been called a traitor like by my own family members, and I've been called, you know, kind of like a disgrace to my race by other family members before. So it really is kind of weird because you feel like you don't have that, you know, like I've never been oppressed before. You know, like I come from a, you know, a pretty well-off family. My dad's an officer in the military. You know, I'm from a German-Irish background. You know, so I don't have like that kind of same story, I guess, that a lot of, you know, a lot of other like converts have. You know, so that was also another thing that kind of made me feel a little bit isolated in a different way, is that, you know, I don't have that common background that a lot of other converts have, you know, and so, but, you know, I don't think that really impacts my, my view on things. You know, I think it gives me kind of a different view of Islam. I think so. But as far as how that, you know, how that kind of works, I still kind of try to figure that out for myself still, you know, is, you know, because like I said, you know, Islam is typically the religion of the oppressed, and, you know, I don't come from that necessarily that background, you know, but it's really interesting because, you know, if I walk into a place, you know, in my jeans and, you know, boots and a hat, I look like just like any other redneck around, you know. It's not, you know, like I can like, you know, it's not the same as being like you know, a female convert, because I can hide it, you know, like if I need to, like, you know, if I, you know, for some reason, like I work in construction, right? And so the vast majority of people that work around me are either from an immigrant background or they're from like a really kind of like racist, you know, local background is the way I'll put it. So, you know, so that makes it really interesting, you know. But yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it is odd, you know, kind of like, you know, for me, the way I look at it sometimes, I'm like, yeah, I really don't necessarily like understand, you know, the background, especially that a lot of like African American Muslims have. So.
Thank you for that. One question on the left.
Assalamu alaikum. Oh, sorry. This is more of a comment than a question, but my mother's also a convert from Nebraska originally, and one interesting thing I've noticed is that because, you know, she kind of found her own way to Islam, she went to the spring, like the core, you know, beliefs, and she became very, I think, like when you convert, you go to the core, and so you kind of understand Islam to its core. Where I think a lot of people born into the religion, they just kind of go towards the culture that they're associated with. And because of that, splits happen, you know, as we see. And culture and religion becomes interchangeable, or you can't, you know, see the difference between the two. Whereas there is a difference between culture and religion. So I believe, you know, growing up, I learned most of my Islam through my mom, because she kind of understood the pure, you know, this is Islam and this is culture, you know. So it's just a comment that, you know.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us. Question I have for both of you: what was the most effective way of other Muslims introducing Islam to you? Because a lot of people think that they're doing a great job, but actually they're pushing people away. But I wanted to know, what was, from your point of view, the most effective way?
So for me, it was just seeing their character. A lot of, no offense, but a lot of Muslims are very closed-minded to expanding their bubble beyond Muslims. They're not the most welcoming, like they don't welcome outsiders into their bubble, into their friendship. So for me, like my first friends in college were Muslim and they were so accepting of me. And once they got very comfortable with me, they would show me videos on Islam, even though some of them are rude. I think just them giving me their time and, you know, casually teaching me about Islam, not throwing it in my face, has helped me. That was the most effective for me. I got to also just spend time with their families during dinners, during Ramadan, like for iftars, and I got to see the way that they interact. So seeing a household and just being around open-minded and very loving Muslims is what helped me. But as I said, you can't be closed-minded. You have to be accepting of including a Christian in your, you know, in your circle. And that's something that I don't see at all, unfortunately. So.
I would say that kind of two like ways I want to answer it is, number one is, if you're dealing with somebody who like you're trying to teach about Islam, you know, really make sure that you understand kind of like the background that they're coming from. And you don't have to be like a scholar in their religion, but you know, it's kind of like, you know, Muslims assume that every Christian like follows a priest, and that's only like 50% of Christians. You know, Catholics have priests, and you know, Protestants don't have anything like that at all whatsoever. You know, so kind of understand like where you're coming from when you're talking to that person, and kind of like where they're coming from. I think that helps, number one. As far as things that people did for me, it was mostly just their actions, kind of like what, you know, what she said. It's not like, you know, the book that they gave me, or it's not the, you know, the fatwa that they showed me or anything like that. It was mostly just, you know, treat me like another person. You know, don't treat me like an infant or a child who doesn't understand anything. You know, show me what you're all about. Show me what you know, how you're following this religion, and that it's a good religion to follow, I would say, is it, you know, because typically reverts get treated like children, unfortunately.
Any other questions from the ladies' side? No, I think we had some comments from Sheikh.
Brief question. The book that you referred to from an imam, can you publicize that to us, that he had researched about the converts and he had some statistics?
Yeah, it was, I can give you his name. I can give it because, he's an imam in California, and his name is Abu Layth Luqman Ahmed is his name. And so if you go on there, he writes a lot of articles for like MuslimMatters.com and things like that. So, but he's written several books, and he's done a lot of research on it as well. So.
Sorry. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is not on the schedule, but I felt that there's a need to address some of the issues that were raised, and for everyone's benefit, including our guests, the reverts. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them and all of you, inshallah. One issue that I noticed worried them was what happens to our family members. And there's a story that happened at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. That was the reason for the revelation of some of the ayat of the Holy Quran, which was, it happened in front of the Prophet that somebody came and asked about those who were Christians or Jews or so on. And the question was what would happen to them. Before the Prophet ﷺ had the opportunity to answer, one of those who was typically very vocal around the Prophet and would answer thinking that he has more knowledge than the Prophet, it seems, and I think most of us know who it must have been, immediately said they're all going to hell. That was the response of that individual, ignorantly responding. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, before the Prophet answers, a revelation came and the ayat were revealed that إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا وَالنَّصَارَى وَالصَّابِئِينَ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا that whoever believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala amongst the believers, referring to the Muslims at the time, and amongst the Jews and the Christians and Sabi'een, and the last one, which is man amana billahi wal yawm al-akhir, I do not limit that to be amongst them. Anyone who believes in God and the Day of Judgment and is doing good in the best of their capacity, they will not be, none of their rewards would be diminished. Rather, they will see their reward and they will have no fear and they will have no grief. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. That is to start with. The second issue, and I'm trying to be very brief. Again, it's non-scheduled. Do I have time? Inshallah. The second issue is who is the lucky one? You know, I heard the comment that you are lucky you were born in a Muslim family. And to be honest, and I'm no offense to anyone, including myself, I don't feel that that is actually the right attitude. Rather, it's the other way around. You are the lucky ones. Why? Because unfortunately, most of us that were born in a Muslim family, we did not get the privilege of researching and having the real faith. Last night I had a discussion with a group in Minnesota, and I mentioned to them over the internet, I mentioned the ayah, إِنَّ الدِّينَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الْإِسْلَامِ. Deen in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Islam. Most people, when it comes to this ayah, they don't understand both terms that are used, Deen and Islam. Most people don't understand both terms that are used in this ayah. They think Deen as we know religion and Islam as we know the label. That's how they know the ayah, which is totally wrong. Deen is way of life. Islam is submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Unfortunately, most of us in our way of life, we have not submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is, I say it with a lot of pain that is in fact in there. It is the reality that our way of life does not reflect, and as you mentioned, that what influenced you and what really attracted you to Islam was people's actions. If us as Muslims all were acting as Islam preaches and teaches us, believe me, there would be no other religion in this world. Everybody would have, in fact, the people who became Muslim in Southeast Asia, Indonesia and Malaysia, historically speaking, they became Muslim as a result of witnessing the honest and trustworthy tradesmen who came and traded with them from the Muslims that used to come and see them. In any case, that is just a brief thing. Searching for truth is another thing that I wanted to mention about this same issue, that just because we reached we were born in something, or we have reached in our life to a certain level of truth, does it mean that the journey towards basically seeking truth and seeking the right path, does it stop there? As I mentioned earlier in the Surah Al-Fatiha, we constantly saying, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Therefore, we're constantly meant to be searching for further truth and further understanding of the truth. That applies to all of us, including yourselves. In fact, I know many who had gone, like you mentioned, you had gone from within Islam in a journey. So in life you went through a journey, and then within Islam you went through a journey which is very unique. In fact, to myself, knowing some of the details of that you probably didn't have the chance to share, but very unique, the journey within Islam. And so for us all, it should be a continuous journey of searching for truth. What happens to previous matters, one of the issues that was brought up, is that you have to make up so many things. And so in Islam, we have a ruling which is set at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Whenever people came into Islam, he said everything before this will get cleared except debts to people. If you have debts to people and things like that, it's a different story, but anything else will be cleared as you enter Islam. That is a privilege, and that is why you are more lucky, in fact. And the last one is the comment regarding the change of name. which I think Sister Debbie brought up. At the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some of the people who became Muslim, the Prophet changed their names and he started calling them a different name. Why did that happen? It was to honor them actually, because typically their names were slave names and foreign names, and now they're living in Arabia, and now he wants to include them to such a degree that nobody can even identify them by the name anymore, okay? That this is an outsider, this is a non-Arab or non-Muslim background or something, so he would give them a Muslim name or an Arabic name, so to speak. Does that apply nowadays in where we live? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it is nice to include them in the community with a change of name. Maybe it doesn't. But the purpose of it is to honor them. So if they feel like an Arabic name that has a deep meaning to it in Islam is more suitable for them and they feel more confident with it, then by all means. If not, it doesn't really. The basically principle behind that change of name is to honor them further. How the Prophet honored them to the degree that Salman doesn't only get an Arabic name and eventually becomes, so close to the Prophet. At some point, the Prophet says, he is from us, Ahlul Bayt. Don't even call him Farisi anymore, because they used to call him Farisi. He says, don't call him Farisi anymore. He is from us, Ahlul Bayt. This is my last comment. Inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all of us to search further for further truth for ourselves, including our esteemed guests, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward them for their efforts, because I'm sure they touched some hearts and affected some of us, including myself. If you have no other comments, nothing else from here. So let us raise our hand in dua and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all of us and all our marhumin, all those who passed away from our gatherings, with the recitation of Al-Fatiha ma'a salat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Before the ziyarah, just a reminder that it is the month of Rabi'ul Awwal. If we can have volunteers to help remove the black cloth, inshallah, and some of the banners, inshallah. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين، السلام على علي بن الحسين زين العابدين، السلام على محمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين، السلام على جعفر بن محمد الصادق، السلام على موسى بن جعفر الكاظم، السلام على علي بن موسى الرضا، السلام عليك يا بنت موسى بن جعفر، السلام عليك يا فاطمة المعصومة، يا فاطمة اشفعي لي عند الله، السلام عليك السلام على محمد بن علي الجواد، السلام على علي بن محمد الهادي، السلام على الحسن بن علي العسكري، السلام على الحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي الإمام المنتظر صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين.